Maybe his memory isn't as great as it should be. I mean, I interviewed him once, he told me his memory was like Swiss cheese, full of holes. So I'd be surprised if that was his most drug-influenced album. I would have thought there were lots of competitors for that title.
The launch of the album also coincided with the tour of the United States. While out in America, Bowie became increasingly fascinated by the culture of the country he was exploring, ideas which would certainly come to fruition in his later career.
He himself had been very influenced by America, by the culture he'd witnessed there, and he was a big fan of Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, the Andy Warhol factory scene. Said that the perfect rock star would be something like the mind of Lou Reed with the body of Iggy Pop, and pretty much Ziggy Stardust attempted to be that.
It was in the lead-up to the next album that circumstances would alter Bowie's sound once more. A falling out with producer Tony Visconti meant that Bowie, along with new producer Ken Scott, would head off in another sonic direction.
Man Who Sold the World did not sell. And when that happens, you know, I think that people get a bit, you know, you get a bit temperamental, a bit touchy, you know. Whose fault is it? Is it David Bowie's? Of course not. It must be the producer.
It's hard to know whether his falling out with Visconti was necessary or useful or anything like that, but it was a thing that happened, and Bowie did what he's always done. He adapted, and he adapted so well that he produced an album like Hunky Dory, which is at least as good a record as any he's ever made, and you could certainly argue that it's his best.
Hunky Dory entered record stores just in time for Christmas 1971. It would prove a remarkable leap forward, the stone-cold classic that Bowie had been threatening to produce for years.
Wake up, you sleepyhead. Put on some clothes, get out of bed. Put another log on the fire for me. I made some breakfast and coffee. Look out my window.
I think Hunky Dory was one of the greatest albums David did. Terrific songs. Changes, Life on Mars. These are standards. These are songs that will be known in 100 years. And they don't have nothing to do with time. We're talking about a great songwriter, separate from the performance, the band, the singing, the production.
It's an artist with a canvas, which is incredibly fortunate that he had that songwriting ability as well, plus surrounding himself with really good people, and being an original artist.
It's Bowie at the absolute peak of his confidence. He has now established himself. He's a superstar, he's a phenomenon. He thinks he can walk on water, he thinks he can do anything, he thinks he can create one of the best records ever made, and he's just about done it here.
Compared with Man Who Sold the World, I mean, musically, it's not as kind of metallic, it's not as edgy, it doesn't have that sort of... It's almost memoirish at times, you know, there's a sort of piano tinkling like a waterfall over most of the tracks.
Oh, you pretty things.
I just think it's one of those albums which is the right thing at the right time and the right place. I think it's really good songwriting, really good craftsmanship.
It is a very strong album. I mean, it shows what a great songwriter he was. There's hardly a weak moment on there. You know, terrific songs like Life on Mars.
It's not as dark as The Man Who Sold the World. He's tempered it. He's even got some acoustic songs on it, like Quicksand is harking back to Space Oddity songs. But it does have some of his greatest songs, which would be timeless and ones he could perform, you know, for the rest of his career, like Life on Mars. Some say his best ever vocal performance, and yeah, I could go along with that.
It reminds me, I have to say, not remotely musical or indeed lyrically, but there's a similar sense about it as I get from something like Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. It's like somebody actually deciding, I'm going to make the greatest rock and roll record of all time, and just about getting away with it.
It is the opening track of the album, however, that remains something of a David Bowie signature tune to this day.
I'm much too fast. Take that test.
Most biogs of Bowie will immediately sort of quote Ch-Ch-Ch changes and say, yes, the chameleon-like Bowie. Of course, he has changed persona many times, he's changed direction many times, changed genre many times.
Obviously, you know, his whole 70s career was marked by changes, you know. Suburban boy into an international pop star was a big change for him. The flouting of his sexuality.
He's like your ultimate exotic chameleon, would be the best way to put it. And his ability to change personas for the different tours we did, I think comes from a very theatrical mindset. So I think he brought so much more to the rock arena than just a great singer with a great rock band. He had all these other things going on. And I just always look forward to it. I've even looked forward to the ones where there is no persona and it's just him and comes out in dungarees and we sing. So they're all very special, and it's always a treat to see what's going to happen next.
I think really it's still very hard for anybody to actually pin down David Bowie, which is lovely. I think that's very cute, and is exactly what I wanted.
You never quite knew what you were going to get, and this at a time when predictability was seen as a virtue, and I can understand that up to a point, because you know, if you buy a packet of cornflakes and you like them, you don't want the next packet to be ginger flavoured or something. So nevertheless, things were incredibly predictable and rather pretentious and pompous, and very little of the music from that era, I think, actually stands much re-examination, which is why I don't bother to re-examine it. But Bowie's stuff probably does.
He does this kind of thing so often that it's very, very hard to imagine that it's not deliberate. I think that's Bowie kind of writing a sort of theme song for himself, certainly, yeah.
Nobody should be at the peak of their career when they're very, very young. They should be getting better and better at it. Unfortunately, a lot of people in pop music don't, and it's one of the great mysteries to me, is whether you lose the muse or you stop being hungry. And somehow David seemed to carry on being hungry for a much longer period of time than most of his contemporaries, and staying ahead of the game and coming up with a new character, like an actor, coming up with or a playwright coming up with a new character. That's the difference between him and everybody else. And the very fact that I think the public rejected him when he tried to be a bloke without an image when Tin Machine happened, I think proves the point that image was everything.
I really do believe that people should not go on with sequels or you know, part 1 and part 2 and part 3 and part 4 of anything, even films. By the time you get to Halloween part 10, everyone's had enough of Halloween, because the number 1 is always the best and the most effective. And it's the same with music, it's the same with people who reinvent themselves.
Whereas somebody can be really good at what they do and keep doing it, whether it's successful or not, I think David makes a point of changing, keeping changing.
It wasn't until that era was over that you realised how tedious it had been, because the only bands that got signed, or the only people that anybody paid any attention to, were people who had already been involved with something else that was successful. So Band A would break up, and the members would go off and form bands B, C, D and E, and they were the ones that got the recording contract. So there's a law of diminishing returns involved in all of this, you know. But Bowie obviously stood aside from that and remained, as I say, his own man throughout this rather sort of creatively destructive process.
The album was also Bowie's most directly personal to date, with standout moments like the track Kooks acting as a charming reflection on his newly established family unit.
There was that track Kooks on Hunky Dory, which was about him and Angie, because he was going strong with Angie at that time, and I think she had quite a lot of input into what he did too.
The family factor had come in. I mean, there'd been Angie and the son, of course, and you know, that is, of course, celebrated on the song Kooks, whether you think it's a very cheesy song or whether you think it's a lovely song.
Will you stay in a lover's story? If you stay, you won't be sorry, 'cause we believe in you.
There is a vast and appalling catalogue of completely dreadful songs written by otherwise great songwriters about their children. There are a lot of songs which should really have gone no further than the nursery, really. But Kooks, I think, works. It's a very charming, simple little pop song. It's very, very suggestive of Ray Davies, I think. It's a very Kinks-like melody and a very Ray Davies-like vocal delivery.
Wonder boy, life's just begun. Turn your sorrow into wonder. Dream alone, don't try, don't run. Life is only what you wonder.
Will you stay in a lover's story? If you stay, you won't be sorry, 'cause we believe in you. Soon you'll grow, so take a chance.
Also of a directly autobiographical slant were the album's explicit references to Bowie's influences. A notable contrast from the usual image of his artistic process being something enigmatic and unique.
There are 2 or 3 tribute tracks, like to Bob Dylan, and there's one to Andy Warhol, which Warhol apparently hated. I don't think those tracks really quite work. I mean, lyrically, he seems to sort of drift, really. You can sense his attention not being quite on the job. There's strange tracks, really. I think that Bowie's best when he's being this kind of almost like missionary narcissist, you know, concentrating solely on himself and the whole sort of motions and movements of his own career and psyche or whatever.
Andy Warhol looks a scream, hang him on my wall. Andy Warhol, silver screen, can't tell them apart at all.
I think maybe from Warhol he was getting this kind of, you know, the instant pop art gratification idea. I mean, that's what made him interesting in the 70s. He wasn't talking about Robert Johnson or blues artists, as people like Clapton were or whatever. He was talking about art scenes, you know. And that kind of, so you know, you know, and it kind of brought you into, it made things interesting.
I really don't quite buy the idea of Bowie as an especially enigmatic figure. I think he's always been actually pretty readable, and really pretty explicitly readable, and probably quite deliberately readable, but I think that's also the reason he's been so influential. You don't get to be an especially influential and important artist if people can't figure out what the hell you're doing.
I guess if I hadn't had any sort of musical inspiration of any kind, I would have been a writer. I was a straight writer. I would have written novels, I think.
There is a mystique about him, and people expect him to be quite mysterious. I don't think he is. I think he's just like me and you. But people see him as something special.
The aesthetics of Hunky Dory were also clearly pointing the way to Bowie's next, and arguably career-defining, artistic move. The introduction of a strange new character and his band known as Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. A project which would see him working once more with musician John Hutchinson.
Mick Ronson and David phoned me at work and said, we're going to New York next week, can you come? And it was as quick as that. I just told my boss I was leaving and going to New York. And I joined an already fairly successful outfit in New York. And the first gig was at Radio City Music Hall, huge gig. And it ended with Long Beach Arena, another huge gig. And we went right around the world with that band. I just stood at the back, played 12-string, did falsetto vocals badly, and thoroughly enjoyed it. His clothes were unusual. He's very theatrical. He had the Japanese designer make him jockstraps and feathers and amazing costumes. And there were costume changes as well as the lights and the big sound system. And he was ahead of the game. He did that before a lot of other people even thought about it.